Hello, my name is Myra Brower. I work for the Council, and I'll be telling you about the upcoming amendment to require electronic reporting for commercial vessels. First, I'm going to go over some background and the proposed changes, what we expect the effects of this action to be, and how to provide your comments to the Council. Then there's going to be a presentation and demo of the application that you can use to report in the future. And then we're going to have a short Q&A session to make sure everyone is clear on what is being proposed. And then finally, you're going to have the opportunity to provide your comment to the Council. To begin, just a quick overview of the South Atlantic Council for those of you who may not be familiar. The South Atlantic Fishery Management Council is one of 8 regional councils in the U.S. They were created in 1976 through the Magnuson-Stevens Act. The Magnuson-Stevens Act established the U.S. Exclusive Economic Zone in the South Atlantic that extends out to 200 miles off the coasts of North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and East Florida to Key West. The council is made up of 17 members, including recreational and commercial fishermen, state marine agency representatives, and representatives from federal agencies, and 13 of those members are voting members. The Council's job is to recommend management actions to the National Marine Fisheries Service, whose job is to implement those regulations if they are approved, and then enforce those regulations. Okay, so now let's dive into some background relevant to the action in this amendment. Data from commercial vessels in the Atlantic and the Gulf are collected by the Coastal Fisheries Logbook program. In the South Atlantic, commercial vessels with permits to harvest snapper grouper species, Dolphin and Wahoo, or Coastal Migratory Pelagics like king and Spanish mackerel have to fill out a paper logbook to report their catches and other information. This logbook has to be mailed to the Southeast Fisheries Science Center 7 days after the completion of each commercial fishing trip. 20% of all the participants in the logbook program are selected to also fill out supplemental surveys. There's an economic survey and a discard survey, and this is done for 1 year. These surveys are mailed out separately from the logbook, and they're only mandatory if the vessel is selected. So what's being proposed is to do away with the paper logbook and transition to electronic reporting for federally permitted commercial vessels that report through the Coastal Fisheries Logbook program. So here's just a visual. On the left here is what the current paper logbook looks like, and on the right is a screenshot of eTrips, the eTrips mobile application that is being used for reporting in other areas. You'll hear more about that in more detail in the next presentation and the demonstration. This is a joint amendment with the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council, and this is because the South Atlantic and Gulf manage king and Spanish mackerel jointly, and also to bring consistency to how commercial vessels report in both regions. The proposed changes may also affect vessels with Southeast permits that also have other permits to fish in the Greater Atlantic region, which is the area from Virginia north, and that also may have permits to fish for highly migratory species. The intent is for vessels with multiple permits to eventually only have to report once. Moving from paper reporting to e-reporting is expected to improve timeliness and efficiency in data collection, improve monitoring, and improve compliance. All reports for a given year must be submitted for a permit to be renewed. And like I said before, we want to eventually arrive at one-stop reporting for vessels that have multiple permits. Okay, so who will be affected? To recap, this amendment should apply to snapper grouper in the South Atlantic, Dolphin and Wahoo throughout the Atlantic, king and Spanish mackerel in the Gulf and the Atlantic, and reef fish in the Gulf of Mexico. Again, these are all federally permitted commercial vessels that are currently reporting through the Coastal Fisheries Logbook program. This graph shows the number of vessels that have multiple commercial permits. This is from a data query that was done in July of last year. but it gives you an idea of the extent of the overlap. On the left, you can see there's 277 vessels that have permits in the Greater Atlantic region and the Southeast. Next, you see there's 146 vessels that have Southeast permits, and they also have HMS permits. And then finally, on the far right, you can see there's 122 vessels that have permits for the Greater Atlantic region, the Southeast region, and HMS. So this graph only shows you the vessels that have this overlap and not the entire number of vessels permitted. So this is roughly 7% of vessels that overlap with at least one other region or fishery. So as I mentioned earlier, eTRIPS is the application that is being used for reporting in other areas and programs, and it's also the platform that you will be learning more about later. eTRIPS is being developed and tested by the Atlantic Coastal Cooperative Statistics Program, or ACCSP, and the Southeast Fisheries Science Center for use in the Southeast. ACCSP integrates all fishery-dependent data for the Atlantic coast into a single database so that stakeholders coastwide are using the same data set. They've been working with partners to make fisheries data reporting easier, more accurate, and more efficient for a long time. In the future, once the Marine Fisheries Service issues technical specifications for vendors to build other platforms, and those platforms are approved, there's going to be more to choose from. After the final rule is published, NIMS will do outreach to explain the changes to fishermen before they become a requirement. As of July of 2023, the expected changes to the data fields would be minor. However, the Southeast Fisheries Science Center and the Atlantic Coastal Cooperative Statistics Program are still working on development and testing of the eTRIPS application, and they may need to make more modifications to ensure that the data are compatible with the ACCSP database. They expect modifications to be minimal, however, and likely to have little effect on the user. The intent is to streamline data collection across federal and state agencies. The supplemental portions of the logbook will be voluntary unless your vessel is selected to report. The information on discards is going to be reported when you complete the disposition of the catch. So that's where you'll be able to select a determination of discard. And so this will make a separate discard logbook no longer necessary. The timing for reporting is not being changed in this amendment. So the requirement to report 7 days after the conclusion of each commercial fishing trip will remain the same. Also, 20% of vessels will continue to be selected to complete the supplemental economic or discard surveys. Now I'm going to quickly summarize the expected effects of what we've been talking about. Biologically, there will not be any direct effects. However, we expect that there will be positive effects from improved timeliness of the data, fewer errors, because submitting reports will be easier, and that may reduce any bias from fishermen having to remember a lot of information. And then finally, we expect there to be better compliance, which is indirectly beneficial. On the economic front, fishermen will need to have a device for e-reporting and have access to the internet. So this may represent a cost for some, but the majority already have a phone, a tablet, or a laptop. There may be some time savings for fishermen to submit as they become more familiar with the reporting platform. E-reporting is also expected to bring savings from increased assurance that the logbook entry was submitted. So what I'm talking about here is about reducing the negative effects from misplaced or lost logbooks, or when the center has to send the logbook back to the fisherman for clarification or correction. For the social environment, we expect some short-term effects from people adjusting to the new process. There may be some fishermen who are not used or comfortable with electronic reporting. However, over the long term, effects are expected to be positive, since electronic submission will simplify data collection and improve quality. So when can you expect these changes to happen? The amendment is expected to be approved in the fall of this year. The South Atlantic Council will consider approval in September and the Gulf Council in October. After that, technical specifications are going to be drafted by the National Marine Fisheries Surveys for vendors to develop e-reporting platforms. The rulemaking may take some time. We expect that by early 2025, the changes can take effect. So this slide and the next two are just a few of the questions we've heard thus far from fishermen, so I'll just run through those quickly in case some of these questions came up in your head during the presentation. Can people continue to use the paper logbook if they want? Probably, but the paper logbook will be discontinued at some point. So there may be a transition period that NMFS will determine. How to know if you're selected to fill out the supplemental surveys, the economic or the discard survey. Check your mail. The notifications are going to continue to be mailed out to folks. The supplemental and economic survey are going to still appear in the electronic logbook, but will only be mandatory to fill out for those vessels that get that notification in the mail. Where do the data go? The data are encrypted to protect your information, and they're transmitted to the National Marine Fisheries Service, who maintains data quality and monitors for compliance for permit renewal. Another question on everyone's minds is, when will one-stop reporting be a reality? Right now, that's unclear, but work is being done to get us there. Fishermen also want to know who to call if they're having issues with submitting their reports. For questions about the software, you would contact the vendor. For eTrips right now, you can go to the ACCSP website, and a help button for eTrips is on the home page. For questions about the logbook program, you would call the Fishery Monitoring Branch at the number on the screen. Okay, so to provide comment on this amendment, we are having a series of webinar hearings this month, and the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council is having 3 more at the end of August, and you can see those dates on your screen. You can attend those hearings and provide your comments to the councils during the comment session. You can also comment and also read other people's comments online through our website, safmc.net. You can mail your comments into the council office to the address on the screen, or you can fax them. For this amendment, we ask that you send comments to us by Friday, July 28th, so that we can compile your feedback for the council to review at their September meeting. Lastly, if you have any questions on the amendment, you can email me or call me anytime.